Dr. Goldiamond, could you please tell us what your present official affiliation is and your title? Or?
Let's see, I am Professor Emeritus in the Department of Psychiatry, in the Department of Psychology section on biopsychology, in the Committee on Human Nutrition and Nutritional Biology, and in the College of the University of Chicago.
All right,
Okay.
great. How long have you held this position, or these positions?
Well, let's see, I've been emeritus since 1 January 1970.
1990.
1990, sorry. Having attained, the age of 70 and mandatory retirement in November of the preceding year, and the university statutes are that you will be allowed to continue until the end of the quarter in which I attained 70.
Oh, okay.
So I continued.
Well,
prior to that, at the university, I've been professor
yes.
since, when did 1970, was it 1968?
I see.
Okay.
And how do you describe yourself as a professional? If a high school student asked you what you did for a living, or what would you answer?
Oh, let's see, I do research, I teach, and I work with patients as part of the research, and also with animals as part of the research. Okay.
Do you consider yourself to be a behaviorist?
Yes.
Okay. Do you consider yourself to be a behavior analyst?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what about previous professional affiliations? Before you came to the University of Chicago, did you hold other
Before
teaching
before this, let's see, I was on a Research Career Development Award at National Institutes of Public Health. I was a director. I rose from educational director to executive director of the Institute for Behavioral Research from 1963, 1968, approximately 1967. I was associate professor simultaneously at Johns Hopkins in the Department of Psychiatry, and then I became a full professor my last year in Maryland at Johns Hopkins. Prior to that, I was at Southern Illinois University from 1960 to 1963, professor of psychology.
Could I interfere because you're getting it wrong? That was ASU.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did I just say?
You said 60 to 63.
At ASU. That's what I said.
You said Southern Illinois.
No, I'm sorry. It was ASU.
now, ASU stands for
Arizona State
Arizona
University,
State,
Tempe,
yes.
Arizona.
Fort Skinner.
Yeah. Yeah, Fort Skinner. And from 1955 to 1960, I rose from assistant professor to associate professor at Southern Illinois University, Department of Psychology. Prior to that, I had been a research associate for 1 year at the University of Chicago, prior to which I was working during which I was working on my PhD from about 1947.
All right, very good. I'd like to know a little bit more about your early background. Where did you grow up and go to high school and undergraduate years?
I went to high school and I went to elementary school in the schools of Brooklyn, New York, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, where my parents lived for a little while. And then went to high school at Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, New York. Went to Brooklyn College, entered the Army, came out at the end of 3 years from overseas, and met Betty again. We met Betty and we got married and went off to California. And I started graduate school at the University of California, Berkeley. And then I was offered a job at the Institute of Design in Chicago. And so I figured if we didn't like it there, we could always go to the University of Chicago in the area. And so it turned out.
Okay. Well, what year did you graduate from high school?
1938.
38. And what hobbies and avocations did you have in your youth, in your early years? Do you recall?
Painting and drawing. These were hobbies. See what else? I liked to write, but I didn't do too much of that. Newspaper work and so forth. But the main thing was painting and drawing is the main hobby.
Well, at that time, what did you hope to become when you finished school?
I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know.
Did you have any animals when you were young?
No. No, I wanted a dog, but my parents felt it was inhumane to keep pets, that they deserve their own freedom and one should not keep them. But we did have a dog when we got married.
Oh, okay. You declared your
We had 2
independence at that
dogs,
point.
yes.
All right.
We declared our independence in other
Okay.
ways.
Now, again, where did you first go to college, did you say?
In Brooklyn College.
Brooklyn College. And what were you studying there?
Social sciences, and I majored in English and studied social science. I was under social sciences, and there was a loophole that I didn't have to. I was not in liberal arts and humanities, which was where English was supposed to be, but I was majored in English, but was in the division of the part of social sciences.
All right.
And I think they changed that loophole.
Because of you?
I don't know. And others like me.
When did you graduate?
In 1942.
42. And what degree did you receive then? Was that BA?
Bachelor of Arts in Social Sciences, yes.
And then did you go into the Army at that point, military?
1940.
What
1942.
What branch were you in?
Originally I was in the Air Force, then I was put into military intelligence, and then we wound up with a branch of the cavalry, the 6th Cavalry Group, mechanized reinforced overseas, Germany and Italza. We went all the way up into Pilsen, Czechoslovakia.
Really?
And then were returned to Paris to be shipped by water transportation to the United States of America for debarkation to the China, Burma, India theater of occupations. But the war had ended. The atom bomb had been dropped while we were in Paris.
Oh, well. Going back just a minute, you mentioned you were born in Ukraine, right?
Came here when I was close to 4, about 3 something.
Do you remember anything at all about it?
Only vague little memories of playing at a pier that must have been in Bucharest or something, and a ball rolling down into the water, being bitten by a dog, being chased by pigs, little disconnected memories. And also remember on the ship coming here, there was a storm and they put ladders on the table, what looked like ladders to keep the dishes from sliding off. But those are my memories.
Well, when you, say when you finished college, when you graduated from college, what were your career goals at that time?
Let's see, at that point, while I was an English major, I thought maybe go into journalism, because I'd been editor of the school paper, write on a paper, and or else go graduate school in psychology.
You were already interested in psychology?
Oh yes.
You had studied psychology in school?
Well, I started to take some courses. I read practically all the things that Freud had written.
I was wondering, did you study any behavioral psychology?
No.
It was not as common at that time. Nobody heard of it, right? No. Okay.
When I went to college, was in graduate school, Skinner was considered a deadly menace.
All right, now that brings...
He stifled everything.
Where was this?
All the fun in psychology, all the fun would be eradicated by these behaviorists.
Oh, yes.
And so that was at the University of Chicago.
University of Chicago. Oh, really? That used to be a hotbed of behaviorism once upon a time.
Well, when?
Well, wasn't it when Watson got started?
Yes, that's right. It was. Watson got the first degree there. But I don't think it was bad. It prided itself on being Dust Bowl empiricism.
Okay.
It was very empirical.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. But Skinner was a little bit too empirical for them, I think.
All right. So now, what degree did you get here at this in your graduate?
I got a PhD in experimental psychology. I was working on perception.
And what year was that?
1955.
Okay, and did you have a minor subject in graduate school? That's not as common.
No.
Okay. Did you do any postdoctoral fellowships or internships?
Well, it was in my last year there. I was, I'd finished my dissertation just about, and so I was on a research. What is it? I was doing some. It was the equivalent of postdoctoral. Where it was a research associate, which is typically awarded only after you got your PhD. But I didn't have my PhD formally, but I had completed the requirements.
Okay. Now, do you recall any particular people in your graduate school career who particularly influenced you?
Yes. It was Howard F. Hunt.
Oh, okay. Yes.
One of the good empiricists. The thing that moved me into the behavior analytic direction was I was doing my dissertation on subliminal perception. And I was looking at the procedures in that area, and the way they got it was they would present a stimulus, say they get the threshold on it in terms of yes, no, do you see it? And then they would go way below that 50% point, which was the threshold. I was trained in psychophysics. I'd go way below the threshold. And then what they would do is they present something, which could be graded on its accuracy. Is it here, there, or here at that subliminal intensity? And the idea was that if you scored better than chance, then since this was below your level of awareness, then this is due to the workings of the unconscious mind at subliminal perception.
Freud was still working there.
Yeah, Freud. That was one of James G. Miller worked on a book on unconsciousness and had 16 definitions, and one of them that Freud used and cited was somebody who had done some work in subliminal perception.
Okay.
And anyway, so I was interested in psychophysics. I applied psychophysical methodology. It occurred to me these were two different procedures. One was accuracy, and the other was saying whether you saw it or didn't see it. There's no checking up on whether you saw it or didn't see it. But you can check on the accuracy. So I presented them both simultaneously in my dissertation. And what happened, the subject had to say whether there was a triangle presented one or two positions, left or right. And the subject had to press a button, left or right, to indicate where it was. And simultaneously he was asked, did you see it or didn't you see it? See, I would get these simultaneously, see what happened. It's a continuous function. And then I figured that, well, the type of response that you used would affect it. So I had, I figured, gee, the golden fleece here of a little yes. Do you see it or not? You see something vaguely, enough to make you accurate. But would you credit that with the same glorious yes that you would something brightly? So these were various degrees of saying yes. So I had you say, yes, I saw it, no, I didn't. That was one group of subjects. They were not run in groups, they were run singly. I'm talking about groups for the purposes. Another group was they had to say, two, I saw it. One, there was something I saw, on which I'm basing my judgment. Zero, nothing I saw. Nothing there. Then the other group, I was told there was a triangulometer, little triangles flashed there. Was a triangulometer. And if they saw it clearly, it's 7. If they didn't see it at all, it's 0, and they would give it to gradations in between. And then because information theory was in vogue, and I was working with some people who knew about computers, and they were pre-computers, but they were developing Mackay and others, and I was in on that movement, to say they were also told, half of them were told they were correct, and half of them were incorrect in terms of accuracy. The others were not, and I figured that information would improve your accuracy. Okay? And so these were 6 groups that were run, 72 subjects.
Goodness.
2 hours each.
Oh my, that's quite.
Oh, it was quite a yes. There were all kinds of different psychophysical methods used on them. It was a very thorough psychophysical job. And then I ran my first subject, and it exploded on me. And Howard Hunt had warned me that you telling accuracy and not accuracy would have certain effects. This is a consequence of the behavior. And he told me to read Keller and Schoenfeld, the effects, the properties of the stimulus. That stimuli did different things. And so hither Keller and Schofield I had read them. I'd read Skinner, but they put a damper, the real interesting things. They left that out. And so I went and read it, and lo and behold, I needn't have done my experiment according to what they said. It was self-evident. But then when I got the results, everybody was proclaiming, gee, reinforcement affects perception. And they were regarding this as a great finding. And I was saying, no, it affects the behavior. Who knows what you perceive anyway? And as a graduate student, I wrote something on a minor effect in the interstation. It was too big for me to handle at the time. But anyway, so I decided that I would learn something about a position which already told you in advance what you'd get. The people came out exactly, that is, you had the curve of accuracy for everybody, combined curve. But in terms of whether they said they saw it or not, depending on the fine grain of the response, the finer the grain, the closer they were to the accuracy curve with the yeses. The more gross the categories, yes and no, the further away, which indicated a huge subliminal effect, that you was not saying you saw it when you actually were accurate, you see? And then the other thing was yes or no, were you accurate or inaccurate? The people who were accurate were told whether or not they were accurate. It did not affect their accuracy, but it did affect their saying yes. Because they said it more carefully and they didn't say it as often. So it had an inhibitory, in quotes. It put it down. And I wrote it up for APA and decided, I said this is the equivalent of a 2x2 matrix. I said, if it was presented and you said you saw it, that was fine. That was what expected. If it was presented and you said you didn't see it, well, you didn't see it, So no skin off your back, like the purloined letter principle. If you said you saw it when it was, if nothing was presented and you said you saw it, you were either a liar or a hallucinator, or something was wrong. If you said you didn't see it, that was fine. So therefore, that would immediately cut down that judgment. The consequences would affect whether you said it. And anyway, those 6 curves, gradually approach that curve. And the top group, you couldn't tell them apart. And the subliminal perception was then an effect of the procedure used and nothing else. Now it's back again. People don't read the literature of the early periods. Okay, so that's what convinced me. So I went down to SIU and determined to learn something about it.
That's when you went to Southern.
Yeah, well, I went to Southern Illinois University.
Southern Illinois. Yeah. Now, who was at Southern Illinois at the time?
Noble H. Kelly, who was a glorious professional psychologist in a sense.
I need to. Your microphone has fallen in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it on the bed because I'll just run one channel on this. I can pick you up here, and I'll just go to one channel there. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, continue.
All right.
Noble Kelly was a professional psychologist in the sense that some people are professional Irishmen or professional Zionists or something of the sort. And if it wasn't applied, it wasn't psychology. It wasn't psychology, to hell with it. The others in the department were other people who were behaviorists a la Spence, so forth, where you had to use statistics that had to be hypothetico-deductive. And again, if it wasn't hypothetico-deductive, it wasn't science. It wasn't science, step on it. And so I was all alone.
Goodness.
But there were some nice, decent people there who didn't have any particular doctrinal views. One was Leslie Malpass. Another was Guy Renzaglia, who was, rehabilitation counseling. And so there were some people who did not. He was from Minnesota. They didn't have any doctrinal views, but the other people had doctrinal views, and they were opposed to what I was doing. So I got an NSF grant and continued doing what I was doing, began to publish. That was, then about 5 years. Joe Brady had a conference on behavior, first on behavior analysis and its ramifications elsewhere. I was supposed to speak on perception, on perceptual behavior, and I changed the title to Perception and spoke there, and Skinner was there. So
when was that?
That was the first conference of the kind, 1958.
I think I've heard others mention that one.
Yeah, and the Statzes were sitting in the audience, and I know who they were, but they, I looked at them, they looked at me, and a couple of years later got a letter from ASU, Arizona State, from the chairman saying, we have read your papers and are interested in your joining our faculty, which was a nice thing. And so anyway, I told Betty I got this letter from ASU, you know, who had ever heard of that place? Nobody had. But I was attending a seminar in signal detection held at Tucson, so I told them I'd go up before then and after then. In the meantime, I mentioned, I was Anna State Hospital, had patients there.
Okay, you did work
Yeah,
there.
so I worked at Anna, and I taught classes there. And I suggested to the director, Steck, that they set up a lab. And he agreed, and he asked me to recruit somebody. So I recruited, I asked Joe Brady whom to recruit, and Joe Brady suggested Nate Asron.
Oh, yes.
So Nate Asron was invited down. He didn't know me from Adam, and I didn't know him, but I went on Joe Brady say so. And Nate Asron went on Joe Brady say so that I was okay. And so Nate came there, and we had long discussions at night. Betty went to sleep on us.
Oh, well, in what year would you say you became a behavior analyst?
Well, I was moving in that direction, and I was doing research on delayed feedback. And I was going to do a study. It's moved in increments. And I was going to do a study on on the effects of delayed feedback, and I was thinking of groups. And I invited Charlie Forster to come down and speak. And I mentioned to Charlie, would Jay I'd be interested in? And he said, no, we're not interested in these kind of group things. We're interested in long-term studies with individuals. And when he said that, I went, and instantly it all gelled. It's like, taking, super frozen water, if you put it in the appropriate glass, and it can be, about minus 80 degrees centigrade, but it's still clear. If it's pure water, clear, and you hit it with a little rod, it suddenly gels, crystallizes. That's what happened.
I see. I did forget one question. When you were finishing graduate school, what were your career goals at that time?
To go on to a university and do research. It didn't occur to me to do anything else. What else did one do? Well, that was one thing that was nice about Chicago. I recall when I was taken from a meeting, I was driving somebody from a meeting, MPA, Midwest Psychological Association, and he asked me, how come you're doing research? So I said, what do you mean? He said, well, usually people get their doctorate just about done published, and they hang around the universities and so forth, and they don't do anything. So I said, gee, do they? Well, most of the people in Southern Illinois weren't. Then it occurred to me, it had never occurred to me otherwise. This is what you're supposed to do. Like not breathing, totally not.
What do you consider the 3 most influential books you have read?
Well, that's a tough area. I don't know. I'll tell you some good books that people should read.
Okay.
But I don't know what the 3 most influential books are.
Well, before you start, would you say that Keller and Schoenfeld book was?
The Keller and Schoenfeld was highly instrumental at that period in time. It still is a good book. Very good book.
Now, what about others there? The ones we
I was interested in biology and psychophysics and so forth. And some books in the biological field were of interest. Somebody wrote a book on the experimental, a man named Paul Vint, wrote a book on the experimental analysis of plants, plant growth, and he'd established a climatron where he put little thermostats, thermocouple. He said, if you got to have exactly the right temperatures and the right controls. Control temperature, humidity, and light, which he controlled to get all over this specially constructed environment. And he put in these little thermocouples underneath the leaves, around the leaf, and so forth. And this old statement of oats, peas, beans, and barley grow, neither you nor I nor anyone else anyone knows how oats, peas, beans, and barley grow. He got them to grow identically by controlling these variables.
Really?
Yeah, so things like this, the influence of the environment, yes. But I don't know what particular books. Keller and Schoenfeld was the one that got me interested. And since then, I'm not going to trace it to any particular book or any particular work. The conversations with Nate influenced me. Nate Asron, that is.
Well, were there any particular journal articles that you recall reading that influenced you?
You mean some that stood out as stellar articles?
Yeah.
I know in the beginning when J-Up first came out, it was all pretty interesting.
No particular one.
No particular one.
Okay. Well, did you start your operant research with animals?
No, people.
People. Okay. Did you ever work with animals?
Yeah, Nate invited me to come down and work with some pigeons, so I
I
did.
see. Are those the only animals you?
Well, up to that time,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
I had envied what Joe was doing with Howard Hunt,
Uh-huh.
with rats, and he was using he was doing
Yes.
operant conditioning. And I was determined I would learn that.
Oh, did you later work with rats and other
Oh yes,
animals?
rats, paddis monkeys, pigeons, all kinds of animals. But my main ones were two-legged without fur.
Okay.
Without fur and without feathers.
Well, when did you first start doing operant research with
With people?
Yes.
At SIU, I got the NSF grant, and then I got another grant. That was just at a perception lab, and I was doing continual work on verbal behavior and perception. And then I started to work on other areas of perception and behavior. And then the delayed feedback, we're doing work on that. That was all prior to 1955. And
Not prior to 55.
prior to 1960. And in 1958, I published an article with, a result out of a seminar I taught at Anna State Hospital, where we worked with I taught that to the staff there. And what they were supposed to do as part of this, do a project of their own. And one of them worked getting a mute catatonic to speak, who'd been mute for 20-some odd years, another one with somebody less, and they got him to speak using operant procedures. And so, they were people, I wrote it up for them, but in as much as they had done the research, and I was simply writing it up. It was Isaacs, Thomas, and Goldiamond. I mean, they had done the research, so their names came first. And anyway, I did that, and that came out in one of the speech journals, Journal of Speech Disorders, in 1958. And that was the same year in which Theodora Ione and Jack Michael wrote The Nurse as a Behavioral Engineer.
Oh, yes.
Prior to that, the only article demonstrating some kind of operant control over behavior was for somebody, they just got him to move an arm or something, or some limb, years before, and that was the only one. The Ione Michael article dealt with using nurses to deal with their patients, and the one by Isaacs, Thomas, and Goldiamond dealt with actual shaping of significant human behaviors. This is speech. And what happened was he finally got this, Isaacs got this guy to speak, and when he asked him, what's your name? And the guy then gave him the name, the town he came from, the entire thing returned. And so I concluded at the end of that what this suggests is that in dealing with psychotics, we should not concentrate on their pathological symptoms, but on what normal behaviors, normal repertoires they represent. And that has been the guiding principle, yes. And so, anyway,
Well, do you feel animal research is relevant to human psychology?
Definitely.
How relevant on a scale of 1 to 4, with 4 the high end?
4.
Okay. Now,
You can't have it without it.
Okay. Good. What main contributions do you feel animal research makes to the study of human behavior?
It provides you with clear control of the conditions. I mentioned this once in a broadcast, and you can do things which are either not feasible or unethical to do with people, and I got a call from somebody saying, how dare you do this to animals when you can't do it to people? And I said, as nicely as I could, that the first laws on anti-vivisection in the world, instituted by a major government, were done by Goering, the Nazi Republic of Bavaria, and so on. Somebody suggested I should say, because we eat them. No, anyway, but no, in actuality, kidding aside, what they do is they allow you to control the conditions. You can set it up precisely. You can ask questions which and get to some of the basic issues. Naturally, you have to study people as well. You don't just automatically draw the relation, but there are certain principles of contingencies which hold regardless of species.
Okay, could you tell me some of the other, either research or applied work you've done, and what other areas?
Good God.
Just some samples. Okay.
Well, let's see now. At ASU, I was concentrating on doing research in perception, and really it was verbal behavior in response to perceptual stimuli. I was going to do further research in conditioning of attaching consequences to eye movements.
To eye movements?
Yeah, for strabismus, and got a grant to do some of that. And then I went to IBR, where we set up a laboratory, Institute for Behavioral Research in Maryland, set up a complete lab there.
And that is the one that's connected to Johns Hopkins, isn't it?
No, it was independent Washington.
Oh.
It was connected with Walter Reed.
With Walter Reed. Oh.
It was a kind of mail drop for Walter Reed. And I was doing research there under USPHS, Research Career Development Award. And we started work with stuttering, work with animals, with paddis monkeys, baboons, and humans, given the identical signal detection experiments. Incidentally, that dissertation I did got picked up by the first experiments, the first reports on signal detection.
Oh, I was going to say, it certainly sounds like signal detection.
Yeah, that was the first one on it.
Yes.
They picked it up, and I was invited to Michigan, and I saw Tanner, spoke to him, and I was part of the original signal detection movement on this. And that introduced me to decision theory. And I began to investigate that, and then I went on. So that was in that area, and that's a very consequential approach. There were 4 contingencies, not just one. And I think the operant behavior is miscreant right now. They're going to get in trouble because they deal with only one contingency. And when you come across behavior you don't like, they either punish it or ignore it or do something that which is not. The trouble with that, you run that on animals, that's fine, but that's not the way it is for animals, nor is it for people, because there are always alternative contingencies available. There are alternative consequences. You want to do something, but you find yourself doing something else, because the consequences are more pressing, or more immediate, whatever it is. And so we're always confronted with, they're called choice and detection theory, but we're always confronted with these alternative behaviors, alternative contingencies all the time. And the signal detection is closer to it because it's got 4 contingencies than the routine operant one, which is only one contingency.
That's right. I never thought of that.
Yeah, and that's the trouble is, it's not that it's bad. You can't go from animal to human. You can't go from just one alone to 4. They do have 2 contingencies. One, you do it or else you starve. It's a bleak case, what is called a very strict, the limited case. It's not that limited usually elsewhere. And so you can't go from a limiting case very often to the more general case, whether it's done with animals or with people. Nothing to do with animals. It's the methodology which is applicable in all cases. I'm a stronger believer in what you call procedural approach. The procedures are what count.
But have you done any applied work?
Well, yes.
Okay, what types? What, for example?
Well, one of the applied things that I, with Mary Jane Buller on, was we're working for NASA, got a contract to teach toilet-trained monkeys for the NASA project.
Yes.
See if they went out in space in free flight, gravity, and they urinated in space, just collect around there. But if they did more than urination, what happened when it hit the fan? But anyway, they wanted to collect specimens.
Yeah.
So we set up a project to toilet-train monkeys. and we learned something very interesting from that.
Yes, I know. I think I know what you learned.
Yeah.
In fact, Mary Jo Willard was talking to me about that.
Yeah, and that was fun. The monkeys kept surprising us. And then I realized afterwards that the big contingents were getting a rise out of the experimenters. Here they are, just sitting alone by themselves, bored to death in this animal situation. And here are these other primates on the outside who make them frustrate.
I think that's one of the funniest stories.
Yeah, but anyhow, so we did that, let's see, and then I went to work, then it was stuttering. I regarded this as basic research.
Well, yes, it's hard to separate the
Hard to separate.
Yes.
And then I worked with while at IBR, I worked with a psychoanalyst named Jarl Dyrud, who was an open-minded psychoanalyst, and I was open-minded to what he had to say, so I tried to learn from him, and he tried to see what I would do to do it. We both came to Chicago. We were invited there by Daniel Friedman as chairman, and I set up I was given a lab at the Museum of Science and History, about 5,000 square feet, and I began to work with people, clinical cases from psychiatry, who suffered all the psychiatric problems, from ambulatory schizophrenia, shall we say zoophobia, A to Z, that makes it nice.
So
but
what kind of-
A to Z,
Oh,
okay.
A to Z.
These were problems seen in psychiatric clinic, and we try to develop procedures to handle them using the operant procedures of, the occasion, the three-term contingency, and the alternatives available. And did it on this, and were fairly successful. I was put on the carpet by some psychiatrists after less than a year there to ask what I was doing, and I got a clean bill of health that what Dr. Goldiamond is doing, we need not worry, he's treating people ethically, because the behaviorist couldn't. But anyway, so we did work on that.
When was that approximately?
Oh, that's been for the last 20 years at
Oh,
least.
you're still on?
We're still, yeah. Oh, yeah. When I'm not doing it anymore because I don't have the lab anymore, I'm not seeing patients anymore. But, we were seeing them. They kept meticulous records, and we analyzed the records, and we had a whole crew of people working on this, getting their dissertations and doing the work.
Well, what behavior analytic related accomplishment are you most proud of?
Well, I think, just, I mentioned what I've done. That's about it, I've enjoyed doing it, and I'm glad they paid me a living wage.
Not only certainly the stuff of research and also applied problem solving, can you think of any problems that called for really novel, off-the-wall kinds of solutions?
I don't know what you mean by off the wall.
Well, some problems where you had to really get a very unusual idea to solve the problem.
The unusual ideas usually were presented to me by the subject matter and the organisms. As I told my students, when the organism, male, animal, or human, does what it's supposed to do, then as far as I'm concerned, all this confirms is how smart we are, and I don't have to be told that. And so, on the other hand, it's when they misbehave, they don't do what they're supposed to do, that point we start to learn from them. I suppose, doing the applying signal detection to operant research, is considered off the wall by a lot of people.
Oh, I think it was at the time, yes.
Yes, it still is.
It's still, yeah.
Still is, and it's just somebody said, do you have these alternatives available to you? Where are they? Well, they're in your repertoire. Where is Hamlet when a Shakespearean company is doing Macbeth? They have a repertoire. They'll do it.
Well, in your work, either research or your applied settings, have you had occasion to work with groups of subjects at once where you're dealing with group contingencies?
Yes.
Okay, well...
that's part of our nutrition program. We set them up in little groups and so on. We worked with families. They were partly groups and partly separate. Certain things require individual behavior, certain things require the group together to work it out.
Tell me about this nutrition problem.
Well, that was dealing with various nutrition. I had a nutrition lab. We were dealing with eating behaviors. And they're not the same, they're not eating behaviors. There are contingents of eating. People will eat for different reasons at different times, and it's not a thing called eating.
All right.
Okay, and that's the
Yes.
that's the trouble with them. They all attack it as eating. It's not eating. Some people, you know, it's like smoking. We also worked with cigarette smoking, and you know, we started to look at smoking in exactly the same way. Some people will smoke, you know, when they're bored and a captive audience. They have nothing else to do, so they literally have to manipulate things. They'll take the cigarette and smoke it. They'll smoke at meetings. In certain cases, they smoked in other situations. As they switch jobs, they smoke. All these have precedence, by the way, in the animal laboratories when animals do this. And anyway, so what you have to do is look at these a bunch of different operants. They're different contingencies, just different consequences, maintaining smoking, different eating. You have to find out what these are and either work on one at a time or work on things. And working with groups is delightful because if person A has repertoire, say A, B, C, and the next person has B, C, D, and the other one has D, E, F, you can see where they can each teach each other different things.
Well, when you deal with groups, do you find the need of any new principles?
No.
In any of your work, have you experienced any failures of behavior analytic principles?
Not the principles, failures in my procedures and my understanding. Well, and then you revise them. For example, I do not believe in most cases there are such things as disturbing or rather disturbed behaviors. I don't believe in pathology, okay?
Right.
Or that these people are acting, that if you put it on a cost-benefit matrix for the misbehavior, in quotes, the behavior which is disturbing to others and possibly to yourself as feedback, and if you look at the alternatives available for you, look at the costs and benefits of each, then an economist will look at it and will tell you that the most rational thing to do is to misbehave, is to schizophrene, or to obsess or whatever. This is the most rational behavior to engage in at the time. So the problem is to either revise the entries in the matrix, which means you got to change the world. I can't do that. Or else you develop a new repertoire, and they tell you what they're after. It's written in big letters as that big consequence. And supply them with that consequence. Try to figure, you'd have to be ingenious to find out. Discover the patients are often more ingenious than you are in discovering how to get it once they're onto it. So,
Well, have you felt that there were any problems that were not addressed by operant methods
yeah.
that you encountered yourself?
Oh, my goodness. Operant conditioning, that which is known is this area. That which needs to be known is the rest of the field. The things which need to be known, shall we say, there are n things which n equals infinity of things which need to be known, and we know only a small, finite portion. And this is the limitation of knowledge and of science, the scientific approach to knowledge, anyway.
In the behavioral programs you've set up, when you've trained technicians or
PhD students.
PhD students or others to take over your programs and run them.
They do.
They do.
Oh, they do it gloriously.
Do you notice any drift in these situations?
No. They're doing them, and they come out with new things. Bless them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to keep on coming. The issue is if I get students in there who are not as ingenious or as bright as wanting to push things as I am, and this keeps on, eventually the field just goes down to nothing. So what you want is people who will be more ingenious than you are, brighter than you are, and so you can fade out, and they will then pursue the field, and they will get people who are brighter and know more than they are, and that's how it expands. Otherwise it contracts. And you want to do it the other way around. So I look for students who will give me a good run for the money. And I've had some very, very bright students. And they're younger than I am, so they can devote more time to it, so they'll run circles around me, and I'm delighted.
Well, a related question, have you had occasion to train, say, in connection with any clinical work, have you had occasion to train staff attendants at institutions or teachers or ward attendants, anything like that?
Yeah, well,
principals?
Well, what I just taught a course at Malcolm X College, which is a city college. They have a program there. Now, I developed behavior analysis for the people who run the program. I just got through with that. They had 3 people, one person. Ken Johnson trained them in the exact procedures they were using, fluency, etc. this is not stuttering, this is fluency in terms of doing things more rapidly. Ken Johnson trained him in this. Another person trained him in a further aspect, and that was to give him a theoretical basis. And apparently all three went over beautifully.
Mm-hmm. And, well, I guess you haven't had time really to notice if any of their instruction drifts as far as...
No, well, I think, if you know what you are doing, it's a little bit better than just you following directions. If you follow directions, you'll follow other people's directions too.
Right.
Misunderstanding.
Have you experienced any ethical objections or questions about changing or controlling behavior?
Have I not? I don't see them as ethical objections on my own, but a lot of people raise them. Mm-hmm. And some behavior analysts behave very foolishly, inhumanely, and unethically. Some of them do this, and they assume that just because they're scientists, they're not. But then when they do these things, they're entitled to do so, and they're not entitled to mistreat other people, or for that matter, mistreat animals like this either.
Have you, aside from the one story you told, have you met other objections about using animals in research?
Oh, there are continual ones, it's a waste of money. I mean, the animal rights movement is, I don't know where animals get rights, I know rights are conferred on people by one group of people upon another group of people, usually after some kind of fuss from the other people. But, I don't know that they have inherent rights. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, they're living organisms, should be treated decently. And you don't go around kicking dogs or mistreating them for the hell of it.
Have you experienced any objections in your programs with humans because the methods were based on animal research?
No. No, as a matter of fact, it's the other way around. I was dealing with a psychiatric patient being observed by residents, and I was comparing this patient's behavior. I cited experiments in the animal laboratory, which the results were quite similar to his. I'm pointing out what was going on, and the psychiatry residents afterwards, during the discussion, says, "You compared him to an animal. How can you? How dare you? It's degrading." And I said, he seemed to enjoy it and was interested in it because it demonstrated to him that his problems were not entirely his own. This was a kind of typical lawful pattern. And lo and behold, he came back the next week, and so on and so forth. We continued on this way. And the people don't mind being educated. And if they're compared, depending on how you compare them. You compare it in a derisive manner, or you can compare it in a manner which helps them. And if you do it in a manner which helps them, that comes through.
Mm-hmm. Well,
there's no set rules on this. It's all a question of good sense, darn it, and how you do it.
What about objections from patients or?
No patients have objected to this, yeah.
Oh.
I had one patient who was a lawyer who objected at one point to being taped. Oh. We gave her back her tapes and thanked her, and that was that.
Well, have you had any objections administratively, from administrators in setting up programs?
Well, when I first came to psychiatry, it was a question of what was I doing. Mm-hmm. And I told you it was a very nice way of, they asked me to report on my cases at a psychiatry, residence. There were two faculty members sitting there. I talked to them about my two cases, and the psychoanalyst in charge said, "I suppose you're going to present us with two successful cases." I said, "No, present you with one case which is moving along successfully. The other case, I don't exactly know where to go next. I'd be delighted for some meeting to it." And he said, "Oh." And anyway, I talked about this, and that was the conclusion they reached, that I was quite ethical and so forth. So that ended that. So I did not meet any objections from them on this. You do meet objections from others, so forth, but not from the people I've worked with.
Has there been any event in your career that dramatically changed its direction?
Well, the automobile accident did.
Yes,
I'm in the wheelchair. Betty will help me. Was that 1970?
October 7th, 1970.
Okay, so that was 70, and I was in the hospital for about, 7 months?
Until the end of June.
Until the end of June. Yeah, and then of course what that did was change my life immediately.
Yes.
And for one thing, it cut down on the working day. So when I get up in the morning, it takes at least 3.5 hours, and I get to bed at least 2 hours, so that cuts down on that time. So now you have to start parceling out your time. And then, of course, it puts a tremendous strain on Betty. She's got to be around on these occasions. So it changes things. So that event has markedly changed things.
I'm sure
But I still try to pursue what I'm doing and the best that I
Yes,
can.
you seem to be doing that. That's
Well,
good.
anyhow.
During the course of your work in behavior analysis, were there any really startling surprises, things that really went contrary to what you expected?
Well, initially I started out when I was at Johns Hopkins. I started out assuming that respondent conditioning, that some of these reactions were respondent. I learned very rapidly that I was disabused of that by the patients. They were not.
What kind of responses are you speaking of?
Well, I mean, the standard thing that the emotional responses are respondent and so forth. And I discovered the emotional responses are not respondent at all. You know, you can look at them as good fancy operants. I mean, people anger for a reason. And when they depress others too.
And they get
And when they're schizophrene, you know, that has an effect on other people around them. And so there are these. But anyway, so I learned very quickly that, you know, I disabused myself of the notion, which was prevalent, that these disturbing behaviors of pathological were respondent. And I learned that surprise was their operant. Then I learned after a while that most of them were not even pathological. They were quite rational. The majority. Now, there are some people with serious brain damage who do all kinds of things, who will do, you know, things peculiar or under the influence of drugs, etc. But these are kinds of stimulus change when the rules get thrown out of the window temporarily. But after a while, it comes on as an operant.
All right. What do you consider to be your most significant or influential publication?
I don't know. No, really, I don't. I have tried to publish for a long time work which was really cute, you know, either read nice, but I mean cute, you know, it was impellingly interesting, or it was, you know, important scholarly contributions, and try to avoid dull humdrum, you know, publication for the sake of publication.
I was wondering if you knew of one that had been cited more often than others.
Oh, so they have been cited. The Isaac Stamus and Goldiamond has been quoted all over the place. I don't know how many citations I can get on that. I did an article on self-control, but based on cases that I've done. And that has been quoted all over the place. In terms of influence, well, they pick these up for elementary books. And I understand now a new book has come out. Millot cites one of my cases. Because it's cute. You know, it's the young woman who had the Gilles de la Tourette syndrome, where I reported that she said the word "uck" preceded by fricative. He thought that was cute. That's in his book.
I missed that. I've read his book.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's the latest one. So I get cited, you know, hither and yon, for different you know, in terms of what interests others. It's, I think, in terms of the books they publish, in terms of what will be appealed to their audiences. And I'm not, my interest in not particularly appealing to one particular audience. I want to get out certain things. Yeah.
Well, if you had your academic and professional life to do over again, is there anything you'd do differently?
Yes, I would have learned more mathematics and more basic science.
All right. How would you advise a student, say a high school or early college student who wanted to go into a career like yours? How would you advise? How would you advise?
Get a good background in the sciences, number one, basic sciences. Get a good background in some of the social sciences, such as, for example, sociology. My wife has always stressed to me the social environment, and she's been a critical influence without publications, you see, all this time about the social setting and so forth and so on. So get them to look at the human being as functioning in a social setting, never independently. And this is seldom considered, you know. We're all social. When we speak, this is social behavior. It's part of a whole social indoctrination. And the reason we're human is because of the social and social business. You know, there's a thing of social evolution. What I mean is that the culture starts to shape you in certain ways, and people brought up in a different culture behave a little bit differently. But the cultures have enough in common for people to assume there are certain innate similarities. Thank you. But anyway, but there are enough cultural elements in common in all societies. Yeah, you can do a very utterly deviant one, like the Nazis tried. You know, where you turn the ethical principles upside down, like they abolish the weak.
Yeah, it's still hard for everybody to
Well, but
understand.
if they had succeeded, they would have turned the code of ethics, which is quite similar in Islam and Judaism, Buddhism. You know, you go to Christianity, go through it. They have similar codes about, you know, how you should behave to other people. Yeah, but it's not, as I said, wired in. The Nazis tried to, quote, unwire it, and they would have been successful if the armies had won.
It was quite a remarkable exercise in behavior control in that.
Yeah, well, they were trying to change things, so they had to exert some stringent controls. If you're already dealing with what's there, you can be more beneficent.
Well, do you feel that there are any roadblocks to the advancement of minorities and women in behavior analysis?
Well, they are in general in the society. And to the extent that they exist in the society, they will also exist in this area.
Are there any particular ones in this area?
Well, you see, now at the present moment, efforts made to recruit, say, minorities, say, blacks. If a black has the education and so forth to go into this area, why go into behavior analysis? Why not go into medicine and make more money, or, you know, do yourself better, and so forth? This is not a very lucrative field, and so why go into one of the non-lucrative fields? You know, why do this? And so, you know, in general, we're not going to get it, and because of the present cast of psychology against behavior analysis, you know, psychology itself, then, you know, not many people hear about it, whatever it is, and what they usually hear is distorted and anti. See, one of the troubles is we're part of psychology, which we are, but that's one of our troubles, because in psychology we're a tiny minority. But if you go outside psychology, you go to economics, they use decision theory throughout, and the governance of behavior by consequences is the rule. That's the rule there. And so their whole discipline is essentially cut of the same cloth as we are. Sociology, you have exchange theory. In anthropology, you have certain theories. Well, they exist all over the social sciences without any prejudices. You go to biology, you have evolutionary selection. We have to make the links. We're not making them. Instead, what we're doing, dealing with isolated individuals, not part of a culture, and alienate. That's what psychology does, and I regret to say that the operant people are eating, you know, the vomit, you know, of the other psychologists. Psychology in general concentrates on the individual. The individual is part of a whole social network, social system, and as long as we do that, we ain't going to get the picture. Doesn't mean you got to go study the whole group, but it means have to consider the group influences.
Whom do you think you have influenced?
My graduate students, directly. Some people who've read my articles have been influenced by them. In some ways, I've influenced other professionals. And I've tried to teach psychiatrists on how to do their business better and so forth. And some of them follow the procedures, and some of them, at the worst, what happens is they no longer, at the end of the courses that I've taught them and the programs with them, they no longer will be behavior analysis, wears horns. They think it's a legitimate approach, and some of them start to follow it. So it depends on how far and how they reinforce this for the patterns of the other people, how close they, you know, to what extent you're going to upset their apple carts. If you,
What persons or groups of persons would you like to influence?
well, what is Charlie first to say today? Operant conditioning, tomorrow the world. But no, but if the whole world were this way, that would be the demise of the field. And I think opposition is useful. It weeds out silly positions.
Well, do you use behavior analysis in your everyday life?
Very much so.
Your family
I
and
mean,
your
well, I
students?
don't go around reinforcing this or reinforcing that. Come on. But you just try to follow principles. Behavior analysis, in essence, is a way of analyzing phenomena scientifically. Okay? I mean, does a chemist use chemistry when he drinks water and puts sugar into his coffee if he wants it sweet? Well, certain principles of chemistry are applied there, but he's not using chemistry in his daily life. Shall we say no more to the extent that any scientist or applied person does that in his daily life?
Do you feel behavior analysis has been successful in solving human problems?
Those that it has tackled, by and large, yes. But some of them, they've fallen flat on their faces on because they deal with silly aspects like garbage collection in parks. Oh, come on.
You don't think that's important?
Well, come on, wasting all this time on that. It's useful.
I agree, there's some more.
Yeah, there are more important things to do than that, yeah.
Well, on a rating scale of success, where behavior analysis has been applied, would a rating scale from 1 to 4, again with 4 being high end?
Well, it depends on what area, and I'm afraid I can't answer that question broadly.
Well, can you think of ways that behavior analysis could be more useful if
Yes.
correctly applied? Okay.
Yes.
Good.
I think, namely that they start to think of the individual in the social context of which the person is a part. That's number one. For example, I was told by somebody, I thought you believed, I said, let's put, at some meeting, professional group, where somebody was misbehaving, I said, let's tell them or else. And somebody said, I thought you believed in reinforcement. You guys believe in reinforcing anybody. And I said, well, you do reinforce when you were both agreed on the goals. But when you're entirely antagonistic, you'd say you don't go around reinforcing the other person, because then they're going to gain an advantage, And so you have to analyze these. So partly it is, we have to start looking at the human being in the social context. We have to start dealing with more than one contingency. We have to get out of this what is it? I now hear the canonical works of B.F. Skinner. Now, come on, he is not a god who is putting something down the sermon line. I think he would be spinning us several times in his grave for that notion. He's a scientist working on things. Some things he will be superseded on, some things will last.
All right, well, that brings me to another question. Do you see any one individual on the horizon who is apt to replace Skinner in the next few years?
Not in particular.
Okay. Are you optimistic about the future of behavior analysis?
Oh, yes.
On a scale of 1 to 4?
Oh, well, I'm as optimistic as I am. Ultimately, one would like to think that, the good will drive out the bad, ultimately. But it takes a long time, as this man at Harvard, a historian of China, pointed out. China developed quite a scientist's compass and so forth and so on, but suddenly they stopped. What happened? Well, the Mongol invasions and a few other things, the society had to turn to repel the enemy from without. And that ended their period of tremendous scientific creativity, and the same thing can happen here.
All right, for what reasons do you lean toward optimism?
As I said, I have no basis on which to do it other than it makes more sense and it's more coherent than other fields with regard to this. However, as I said, there are all kinds of, the scientific movements themselves are parts of a social contingency network. As I stated a long time ago, when we say there's no power greater, than idea whose time has come, which is a misquotation of Victor Hugo, incidentally. But nevertheless, when we say this, that's not a, put it this way, there's no power as great as an idea which rationalizes contingencies whose time is now here.
I don't think Victor Hugo said that either.
No. And so now if we look at some of the social movements today, we have to look at the social contingencies. In other words, if you have women's lib, you have a variety of these, and you didn't have them before. Right now we're in a situation where both parents have to work to support the families. Good jobs for the male are gone. They both have to work to support a family in the style to which they've been accustomed to, etc. They both have to work, therefore you come out with a rationale. It's useful for women to work, just like after World War II. You know, when they were afraid of mass unemployment, when the men were returning home, then Rosie the Riveter was told by everybody, including Bettelheim, to go home and deal with your children.
Did Bettelheim say that?
Yes, yes,
Really?
yes. The function of what a woman's place is in the stove, of course, yeah. But anyway, he didn't say it in those words. But
well, where do you think the field is going? What directions do you see it taking in the next 10 to 20 years?
I don't know. A lot of the field is going off marching in the wrong direction, but that's to be expected.
Okay.
Doesn't bother me. I'll continue doing what I'm doing.
Yeah,
And if my
probably
views aren't getting across, it's because I haven't published enough. That's all. It's my fault, not theirs.
Well, most people seem not to have a very clear idea of what science is all about. Could you
That's true.
Could you help clear up the confusion by giving us your definition of science?
Science is a method of analyzing what's going on around you. That's what it is. And when you say analyzing, I don't mean looking at it. You come in with certain conceptual frameworks.
Okay. How does that differ from technology?
Technology, well, let's see, you're dealing with a subject I've lectured on for some time.
Okay.
Well, let's see now, or let me deal, with two areas of human endeavor, and I'm not meaning to deprecate or elevate either, say science and religion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you look at parsimony, which is a critical thing of this, then science attempts to be parsimonious, stating, general principles which apply. If you go look at religion, boy, that is parsimonious. In the beginning, God created the heaven, that's it. So that's more parsimonious. If you look at a variety of things, if you look at what is it? Not simply economy and parsimony. You look at a systematic, arrangement. Does it contradict itself or it doesn't? Science attempts not to be self-contradictory, be a rational system. Certain religious groups do. A lot of religious positions are, go into circles, so do a lot of scientific ones, but there are a lot who try to be rigorous on this and not to come out with, conclusions which violate the assumptions which they entered on. Then you look at prediction and control, and people say that prediction and control are, that's what science is after, in contrast to the other. Nonsense. Religionists, they try to predict. That's what prophecy is about. And they also try to control the Hopi dances, yes, and the supplications to whatever deity one is following. And so the question is, what is the difference between these two efforts to systematize in a rational manner? And the difference is not prediction and control, but the use of prediction and control. Science uses prediction in order to validate and invalidate its theory. In science, you're allowed to say that if my theory calls for the data to come out in a certain way, and they do come out that way, you can use that to validate your theory only to the extent that if you say, I predicted it this way, and then it does not come out this way, that invalidates my theory. That's what they forget. Mm-hmm. That it's the falsification, which is the critical mark. It has this falsified notion built into it. Religion does not have it in this manner. And control is a subset of prediction. If you can control, you can predict, but not vice versa.
Okay, now where does this leave technology?
Technology is a method, is one thing. It's you apply science by hook or by crook. Sometimes you apply to it as well notions you dream up and so forth. Reichenbach talks of the context of justification and the context of discovery. So in technology you do things, and the technology then develops procedures which are used by science. The germ theory of disease would not have been really scientifically feasible or possible without the microscope, which was an accidental change because it was used by the Chinese astronomy, by the Chinese navigators, and then it had to be around for a couple of hundred years before a Dutchman named Leeuwenhoek turned it around and magnified little things. Okay, now we're on to electron microscope. That opens whole new fields. And now this science is tremendously enmeshed in this kind of in technology and advance of it. And the cognitive people, they're after people's thinking and so forth. This is fine, so are we. But I submit to you that when we get the technology finally to answer these questions, it's not going to be what they're talking about.
Well, what's been the impact of science in general on your own life?
Well, I've tried to follow it in my research.
What about
do I use the if so then so method? What I do, come on. You try sometimes. Yeah.
What about the impact of science on the world at large?
It's been quite large. I mean, look at the A-bomb and a few other
A few
things.
other things.
Yeah. Electricity, the radio, TV.
Do you consider psychology to be a science?
Depends on who uses it.
Okay. Well, then the next part of this was, can there be a psychology without a science?
Oh yes. Why not? You can have psychoanalysis. And the trouble with psychoanalysis, of course, is it's not disproven. You can't disprove it, you know. Here, see, let me have that pencil, please. Take that pencil and keep it. There, I'm demonstrating my interest in the phallus, right? If I return it to you, I'm demonstrating my interest in the phallus, which I am repressing. Okay, heads I win, tails you lose. I mean, you cannot falsify psychoanalysis. It's not a science. It's got some nice ideas, but it's not a science.
Well, what do you consider the average man in the streets or person in the streets concept of science would be?
Pretty bad. I mean, it's not me, it's all the studies done by society, you know, the skeptical inquirer and so forth.
What do you think we can do about that?
Educate. And got to set up you got to set up contingencies to get a decent school system.
Yes.
Okay? People can't read, they're not going to read. They'll be able to tell the difference between the good and the bad, and they don't know anything about history. They're doomed. And they're not teaching them history. They're not teaching them the development of science.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to share your experiences and your insights with us. It's been a great pleasure.
Well, thank you very much.